In a country built on trust, judges are supposed to follow the law and protect it. But sometimes the people in charge of justice break the rules themselves. Today we're going to look at real stories of U.S. judges who were sent to prison. Don Yarborough. At just 34 years old, Don pulled off something nearly impossible. In 1976, he got elected to the Texas Supreme Court, and that shocked the political world. He had almost no experience, little money, and no support from the state's legal or political elites. But voters picked him anyway. It was a true underdog story, or at least, it seemed like one at the time. What the public didn't know was that behind the scenes, Yarborough's world was already crumbling. In the months that followed his big win, serious cracks began to show. He was under investigation for forging documents and filing false statements related to his campaign. And things would only get worse from there. By 1977, just 1 year after taking office, Yarborough was indicted for perjury. The charge was connected to his attempt to cover up a prior felony charge for tampering with a government record. It wasn't a minor slip-up. Lying under oath is one of the most serious crimes for someone who serves in the justice system. And it was just the beginning. As pressure mounted, Yarborough resigned from the Texas Supreme Court in disgrace. But he didn't just leave quietly. Before his trial, he fled the United States entirely, trying to avoid prosecution. For a while it seemed like he might vanish off the map, but federal authorities caught up to him. He was tracked down, brought back, and finally had to face the charges in court. In 1979, Don Yarborough pleaded guilty to perjury and was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison. The fall from grace was complete. Just a few years earlier, he had worn the robes of a state Supreme Court justice. Now he was trading those robes for a prison jumpsuit. The scandal surrounding Yarborough rocked Texas politics and legal circles. It exposed deep flaws in how high-level judicial races were being run. Races where voters often had little information about the candidates. Many questioned how someone with so many red flags made it to one of the highest courts in the state. It was a lesson in how charisma and momentum could sometimes hide the truth, at least for a while. Unlike others who may have been quietly removed or pressured into early retirement, Yarborough's story ended in federal custody. His sentence marked a rare moment when a state Supreme Court justice, sworn to uphold the law, was held fully accountable under that same law. After serving part of his sentence, Yarborough was released, but his name was forever tarnished. He lost his law license, his seat of power, and his place in Texas history, for all the wrong reasons. In the years that followed, Texas would tighten its vetting processes and election standards for judges, but the damage had already been done. Yarborough's case remains a permanent stain on the Texas Supreme Court's legacy, and a cautionary tale about what happens when personal ambition overtakes public duty. Mark Ciavarella, He was once a judge in Luzerne County, Pennsylvania, known for his tough stance on juvenile offenders. His career seemed unstoppable, and many saw him as a strict enforcer of the law. But in 2009, everything changed when he was exposed for his involvement in one of the most outrageous and disturbing corruption scandals in American judicial history. Ciavarella was convicted of taking bribes in exchange for sentencing young offenders to private juvenile detention centers. Ciavarella's crime was shocking because of the victims involved. Instead of offering fair trials and justice to the juveniles before him, he had been part of a massive scheme where he took kickbacks from private prison companies in exchange for sending kids to jail. The private companies would then profit off the young prisoners, and Ciavarella would pocket large sums of money. This illegal practice became known as the Kids for Cash scandal. The story began when a federal investigation uncovered the shocking details of Ciavarella's involvement with 2 private detention centers in Pennsylvania. The facilities, which were run by a company called PA Childcare, had a major financial incentive to keep their beds filled. And Ciavarella made sure that happened. He sentenced young people, many of whom had committed minor crimes or were first-time offenders, to harsh sentences, even though they didn't deserve it. Some of the juveniles were sent to prison for months or even years for relatively minor offenses like shoplifting or fighting at school. The most upsetting part of the case was how Ciavarella treated these children. Many of the juveniles didn't even have legal representation in court, and Ciavarella often rushed through their hearings without giving them a chance to defend themselves. The kids were sentenced to harsh punishment, also that the private prisons could continue to make money from their imprisonment. The system had been rigged for financial gain, and the children were the ones who suffered the most. The case came to light after the parents of a young girl named Hilary Transiu spoke out. Hilary had been sentenced to a private detention center after being involved in a school fight. Her parents discovered that Ciavarella had taken bribes from the detention center in exchange for sending Hilary and other young people there. This sparked an investigation that would eventually bring Ciavarella's entire operation into the spotlight. In 2011, Ciavarella was convicted of bribery, racketeering, and conspiracy. The charges were directly related to his role in the Kids for Cash scandal, where he took over $2 million in bribes from the private detention centers. In 2012, he was sentenced to 28 years in federal prison, one of the longest sentences ever handed down to a former judge for corruption. The case sent shockwaves through the legal world and led to widespread outrage. Ciavarella's actions were a betrayal of the very system he was meant to protect. Instead of offering justice to young offenders, he exploited his position for personal gain, all while ruining the lives of hundreds of children. Many of the juveniles he sent to the private prisons were scarred by their experiences, and some of them even lost years of their lives to an unjust system. The fallout from the Kids for Cash scandal was massive. It sparked public outrage and raised serious questions about the role of private prisons in the U.S. legal system. It also led to calls for reform in juvenile justice, as people recognized how vulnerable young offenders were to exploitation. Many of the juveniles affected by Ciavarella's decisions later had their convictions overturned, but the damage had already been done. Ciavarella's case is a reminder of how the pursuit of money and power can corrupt even those entrusted with the responsibility to uphold justice. His actions left a lasting mark on the children he harmed, the people of Pennsylvania, and the reputation of the judicial system as a whole. It's a dark story of greed, betrayal, and the human cost of corruption. Samuel B. Kent. He served as a federal judge in the Southern District of Texas, appointed by President George H.W. Bush in 1990. Kent held a prestigious position in the federal court system. However, his career came crashing down in 2009 when he was charged with serious sexual misconduct, leading to his resignation and imprisonment. Kent's crimes included sexual abuse and obstruction of justice. In 2007, 2 women came forward accusing Kent of sexual assault. The first was a court employee who claimed Kent had groped her multiple times. Another woman, a former colleague, alleged similar misconduct. Kent denied the allegations at first, but after an investigation, the truth became clear. Kent was accused of using his power as a judge to exploit women working under him, creating a toxic environment that went unnoticed for years. The accusations were particularly shocking because Kent, a respected federal judge, held a position of authority and trust. In 2009, after several months of investigation, the Department of Justice moved to press charges against him. His actions were a stark contrast to the ethical standards that federal judges are expected to uphold. When the evidence became overwhelming, Kent resigned in disgrace. The scandal shook the Texas legal community, as well as the broader judicial system, where such abuses of power are rarely seen. Samuel Kent was ultimately convicted of 3 counts of sexual abuse and sentenced to 33 months in federal prison. This was the first time a federal judge had been convicted of sex crimes. To make matters worse, Kent tried to cover up his actions by obstructing justice. He attempted to influence the investigation and block the evidence from surfacing, but his efforts were unsuccessful. In addition to his prison sentence, Kent faced further humiliation when he was impeached by the U.S. House of Representatives. The Senate removed him from office, and his disgraceful departure from the bench marked the end of a once promising career. Kent's case served as a reminder of the importance of accountability within the judicial system, and the need to ensure that those in power cannot abuse it without consequences. This case is particularly significant because of the broader implications it had for the federal judiciary. The sexual misconduct of a federal judge, especially one who had been trusted with overseeing serious criminal and civil cases, shocked many. Samuel Kent's crimes were a dark chapter in the history of American jurisprudence, showing how far someone could fall when power and trust were abused. His conviction also highlighted how necessary it is for the judicial system to be vigilant in preventing such abuses and holding those who break the law accountable, no matter their status or position. Thomas J. Spargo Key. He was a judge in the New York Supreme Court, a position that gave him significant power over cases involving both civil and criminal law. Appointed to the bench in 1999, Spargo seemed to have a promising future. He was respected for his experience in law and his dedication to serving justice. But in 2009, Spargo's career took a devastating turn when he was arrested for a bribery scandal that would forever tarnish his reputation and cost him his position as a judge. Spargo's fall from grace began when a federal investigation revealed that he had been involved in a scheme to solicit bribes from attorneys in exchange for favorable rulings. According to investigators, Spargo used his authority as a judge to demand large sums of money from lawyers who appeared in his court. In exchange for the bribes, Spargo promised to rule in the favor of those lawyers' clients, which is a clear violation of judicial ethics and the law. The scandal came to light after one of Spargo's associates, attorney John C.P., came forward and provided evidence that he had given Spargo cash payments in exchange for favorable rulings in several cases. As investigators dug deeper, they discovered that Spargo had engaged in similar behavior with other lawyers over the years, including asking for bribes from law firms in return for favorable judicial decisions. Spargo's actions were particularly alarming because they involved not just the taking of bribes, but the deliberate manipulation of the legal system for personal financial gain. As a judge, Spargo was expected to be impartial, fair, and trustworthy. Instead, he used his position to betray the public's trust, creating an environment where justice was sold to the highest bidder. In 2010, Spargo was indicted on charges of bribery, fraud, and money laundering. The case shocked many, as it was rare for a judge in the New York Supreme Court to be accused of such serious crimes. The legal community was stunned that someone in such a prestigious position could abuse their power in such an egregious way. Spargo was arrested and faced federal charges that could have resulted in a long prison sentence. The trial was a lengthy and high-profile affair, with Spargo facing multiple counts of corruption. The prosecution presented evidence showing that Spargo had accepted bribes over a period of several years and had used his position to enrich himself at the expense of the legal system. In 2011, after a lengthy trial, Spargo was convicted on charges of bribery and corruption and was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison. Additionally, he was ordered to forfeit the $70,000 in bribes he had taken during his time on the bench. The conviction of Thomas Spargo sent shockwaves through the judicial system. It was a stark reminder that no one, not even those in the highest levels of the court, is immune from corruption. Spargo's case also highlighted the ongoing problem of judicial corruption in the United States, with many calling for more rigorous oversight and reforms to prevent future abuses of power by judges. In the aftermath of Spargo's conviction, many questioned how such a scandal could have gone on for so long without being discovered. The case prompted calls for increased transparency and accountability within the judicial system. It also raised concerns about the influence of money in legal proceedings, and whether the justice system was truly impartial when judges could be swayed by financial incentives. Spargo's actions also had a profound effect on the people who had appeared before him in court. Lawyers who had been forced to pay bribes felt betrayed by the system, and many clients who had been affected by Spargo's rulings later found out that their cases had been influenced by corruption. The damage to Spargo's reputation was irreparable, and his career as a judge was completely destroyed. His conviction served as a powerful reminder that corruption can be found anywhere, even in the places where we expect the most integrity. Thomas Spargo's case also reinforced the need for vigilance and reform in the judicial system to ensure that the law is applied fairly and impartially, without the influence of money or personal gain. Gerald Garson Sit. Gerald Garson's career as a New York Supreme Court justice came to an abrupt and shocking end in 2007, when he was convicted for accepting bribes to manipulate divorce case outcomes. Garson, who had served as a judge in Brooklyn, was found guilty of using his position to make corrupt decisions in divorce and custody cases. He was sentenced to 3 to 10 years in prison, and served approximately 30 months behind bars. The investigation into Garson's corrupt practices began when several people came forward, revealing that the judge had been accepting bribes from divorce lawyers to influence the outcomes of cases in their favor. These bribes were typically paid to Garson in exchange for favorable rulings, particularly in contentious divorce settlements where large amounts of money and assets were at stake. Garson's actions undermined the integrity of the judicial system and further eroded public trust in the courts. In 2007, Garson was convicted on charges of accepting bribes and committing conspiracy. He was found to have engaged in illegal activity that violated the ethics and trust expected of someone in his position. This type of corruption is especially dangerous in the legal system, where judges have the power to shape the lives and futures of those who come before them. Garson's misconduct was a betrayal of that trust, and showed how vulnerable the legal system can be to corruption if there are no safeguards in place to prevent it. The case of Gerald Garson made headlines, not only for the crimes he committed, but for the broader implications it had for the public's perception of the justice system. When a judge, whose job it is to ensure fairness and justice, is caught engaging in bribery and manipulation, it shakes people's faith in the legal process. It was a wake-up call that demonstrated just how far some individuals would go to exploit their positions for personal gain. Garson's conviction and sentence were a rare but important reminder of the importance of ethical standards in the judiciary. He was disbarred, and his reputation was permanently tarnished. The impact of his actions, however, would extend beyond his own downfall. His case helped shine a light on the possibility of judicial corruption and the necessity of continued vigilance in maintaining the integrity of the courts. Tracy Hunter Sit. Tracy Hunter was a juvenile court judge in Hamilton County, Ohio, who made headlines in 2014 when she was convicted of unlawful interest in a public contract. Hunter was accused of intervening in a personnel matter involving her brother, who was employed by the county juvenile detention center. Hunter had used her position to help her brother avoid disciplinary actions at work, and her involvement in this matter led to charges of misconduct. The case against Tracy Hunter was highly controversial. She was sentenced to 6 months in jail after being convicted of using her judicial office to influence the outcome of a contract dispute and personnel matter involving her brother. Hunter maintained that the charges against her were politically motivated, and that she had been the target of a broader campaign to discredit her. Despite her protests, Hunter was convicted and sent to jail, making her one of the few judges in Ohio to be sentenced to jail time for criminal conduct. Her conviction raised serious questions about the ethical conduct of judges, particularly those in family and juvenile court systems. Hunter's case also brought attention to the delicate balance of power that judges must maintain, and how easily they can fall victim to conflicts of interest if they are not careful. Hunter's conviction was seen by some as an example of how even judges are not above the law. Despite her position of power, she was held accountable for using her role to manipulate the system for personal gain. Her case serves as a reminder that no one, regardless of their title or position, is immune to the law, and that justice must be served even when those entrusted with it break the rules. Diane Hathaway, judge in Michigan. Diane Hathaway was once a respected judge in Michigan. She was known for her fair decisions and her work on the Michigan Court of Appeals. But in 2013, Hathaway's career came crashing down. The public couldn't believe it when they learned that she had used her position as a judge to hide money and avoid paying her debts. She was caught committing bank fraud, a serious crime that shook the legal world. Hathaway had a secret. While serving as a judge, she used family members to hide millions of dollars in bank accounts. This helped her avoid paying off her mortgage. She transferred the money into these accounts and then lied about her finances during a bankruptcy proceeding. This deceitful act wasn't something most people would expect from someone in such a trusted position. The scam started when Hathaway was facing foreclosure on her home. Instead of following the law, she tried to get out of her debt by hiding her assets. She asked her family members to take the money from her bank accounts and place it in their names. This way it wouldn't show up in any legal proceedings, making it seem like she had less money than she actually did. It was a simple but sneaky trick to avoid paying what she owed. But of course it didn't stay hidden forever. Hathaway's illegal actions were discovered after an investigation. Once the truth came out, she faced charges of bank fraud, a crime that could have sent her to prison for a long time. In court, Hathaway admitted to her crime and took responsibility for what she had done. But that didn't make it any easier for the people who trusted her to make fair decisions in the courtroom. Hathaway was sentenced to 1 year in federal prison for her actions. She also had to give up her position as a judge. Her fall from grace was a huge shock, especially because judges are supposed to be role models for others. They are trusted to follow the law and make fair decisions, but Hathaway broke that trust in a very serious way. The case was especially troubling because of how high-profile Hathaway's role was. She wasn't just any judge, she was a respected figure in Michigan's legal community. For many, this was a reminder that even people in powerful positions can make poor choices. It also raised important questions about whether judges, who have so much power over others, are being held accountable for their actions. Hathaway's case also made people wonder how many other judges might be breaking the law behind closed doors. If someone in such a high position could commit fraud without being caught for so long, what about others? It led to discussions about the need for stronger oversight of judges and the possibility that some might be using their position for personal gain. But Hathaway didn't just damage her own career, she also tarnished the public's trust in the judicial system. People began to question whether other judges could be hiding their own secrets. It was a dark moment for Michigan's legal community and a stark reminder that no one is above the law, not even a judge. In the end, Hathaway served her time in prison and lost everything: her career, her reputation, and her credibility. But the effects of her actions were felt far beyond just her own life. Her case became a symbol of how even those who are supposed to enforce the law can be tempted to break it. This case serves as a lesson: judges are not invincible. While they are meant to be trusted with the highest responsibilities, they can fall just like anyone else. Diane Hathaway's story is one of corruption and betrayal that left many questioning the integrity of the system. It's a reminder that even those who wear the robe of justice can sometimes lose their way. Menis Ketchum. In 2018, Menis pleaded guilty to a crime that stunned the public and shook the trust in the judicial system. Ketchum had used a state vehicle and gas card for personal use. While this may seem like a small mistake to some, it was a significant violation for someone who was in a position to uphold the law. As a justice, Ketchum had a responsibility to set an example for others, but his actions showed that even those in the highest positions of power can falter. Ketchum was charged with wire fraud, a federal crime which is serious and carries heavy penalties. The court sentenced him to 3 years of probation and a $20,000 fine, but the damage to his career was already done. Ketchum was also disbarred, meaning he could no longer practice law in West Virginia, stripping him of his legal career. His crime wasn't just a breach of trust, it was a betrayal of the public's faith in the judicial system. People trusted Ketchum to make fair and unbiased decisions, but his own misconduct called into question whether he could truly be trusted to deliver justice. The case of Menis Ketchum is a stark reminder of how even small acts of corruption can have a massive impact. It serves as a warning that judges and others in positions of power must be held accountable for their actions, no matter how small the crime might seem. For Ketchum, the sentence he faced didn't just take away his freedom, it also cost him his career, his reputation, and his legacy. His case reminds us that the people we trust the most to uphold the law are not immune to breaking it themselves. Michael Conahan, like his co-conspirator Marcus Ciavarella, he was deeply involved in the Kids for Cash scandal which rocked Luzerne County, Pennsylvania. Conahan served as a judge at the same court as Ciavarella, and was just as guilty of exploiting the juvenile justice system for personal gain. The two judges worked together to funnel young offenders into private for-profit detention centers in exchange for kickbacks. Conahan's involvement in the scheme was just as damning as Ciavarella's, and his actions destroyed the lives of thousands of children. Conahan's role in the scandal was pivotal. He helped facilitate the deals with the private detention centers, ensuring that Ciavarella would receive the kickbacks for sending juveniles their way. He also played a part in pressuring juveniles into pleading guilty to offenses they might not have committed. In return for his involvement, Conahan was promised a portion of the illegal payments made to Ciavarella. After the scheme was exposed, Conahan faced charges and was convicted of racketeering, bribery, and fraud. In 2011, Conahan was sentenced to 17.5 years in federal prison. While his sentence was slightly shorter than Ciavarella's, it still served as a clear message that judicial corruption would not be tolerated. Conahan's actions were reprehensible because, like Ciavarella, he used his power to manipulate the system for personal financial gain at the expense of children and families. The damage he caused to the integrity of the justice system was immeasurable, and his conviction was a long overdue step toward restoring faith in the courts. The case of Michael Conahan serves as a reminder of how vulnerable the justice system can be to corruption. It also highlights the need for greater oversight and accountability for judges, who must be held to the highest standards of integrity. Conahan's involvement in the Kids for Cash scandal not only ruined his career but also left a stain on the judicial system that took years to undo. His case is an example of how unchecked power can lead to disastrous consequences, particularly when it involves the lives of vulnerable children. Walter L. Nixon served as a U.S. District Judge for the Southern District of Mississippi, a position he was appointed to in 1985. Nixon's career, however, came to a dramatic end in 1989, when he was convicted of perjury before a grand jury. Nixon's fall from grace is particularly significant due to his impeachment and removal from office, a rare and serious consequence for a federal judge. The charges against Nixon stemmed from his testimony during an investigation into alleged bribery. Nixon was accused of lying under oath about his involvement in a scheme to help an individual with a federal case in exchange for a bribe. He denied any wrongdoing, but the investigation revealed that Nixon had committed perjury during his testimony before a grand jury. This deception led to serious consequences, not only for Nixon's career but for his standing within the judicial community. In 1989, the U.S. House of Representatives voted to impeach Nixon, marking a rare instance in which a sitting judge was impeached for misconduct. The Senate followed suit, and Nixon was removed from his position as a U.S. District Judge. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison for his actions. Nixon's conviction and subsequent removal from office sent a strong message about the consequences of dishonesty and corruption within the judicial system. It also served as a reminder that no one, not even federal judges, is above the law. Nixon's case stands out in history due to the impeachment process and the severity of the punishment he received. The impeachment of a federal judge is not something that happens often, but when it does, it sends a clear signal that corruption and perjury will not be tolerated in the judicial branch. Nixon's actions left a stain on his career and on the reputation of the judicial system, but they also highlighted the need for accountability within the federal courts. Harry Claybornne. He was a U.S. District Judge for the District of Nevada, who became notorious for his conviction on charges of tax evasion. Appointed to the bench by President Jimmy Carter in 1978, Clayborne's career took a sharp downturn when he was found guilty of willfully failing to pay taxes on his income from 1977 to 1979. His conviction in 1984 was a shocking event in the judicial world, as it marked the first time a sitting federal judge had been convicted of such a serious crime. Clayborne's tax evasion was not a minor oversight, but a deliberate attempt to avoid paying taxes on hundreds of thousands of dollars in income. The investigation into his financial dealings revealed that he had underreported his income and falsified documents to hide the money. His actions were seen as a betrayal of the trust placed in him as a federal judge, as it undermined the integrity of the judicial system. In 1984, Claybornne was sentenced to 2 years in prison for his crimes. He was also impeached and removed from office, making his case one of the most high-profile examples of judicial misconduct in the 20th century. The case of Harry E. Claybornne sent shockwaves through the legal community, as it highlighted the vulnerability of judges to financial corruption and tax fraud. Clayborne's conviction was a pivotal moment in the history of the U.S. judicial system, emphasizing the importance of honesty and transparency, especially for those entrusted with upholding the law. Despite the seriousness of his crime, Clayborne's case also brought attention to the challenges of prosecuting sitting judges. While judges are held to high ethical standards, they are also protected by certain legal immunities. The fact that Claybornne was convicted and removed from office showed that even those in the highest positions of judicial authority could be held accountable for criminal behavior. Alcee Hastings, he was a U.S. district judge who served the Southern District of Florida until his impeachment in 1989. Hastings was convicted of soliciting a bribe and was subsequently impeached by the U.S. House of Representatives. What made his case particularly remarkable was not just his conviction, but the fact that Hastings later went on to serve in the U.S. House of Representatives, where he became an influential figure in Congress. In the late 1980s, Hastings was accused of accepting a bribe in exchange for reducing the sentence of a convicted criminal. The case stemmed from a 1981 investigation into Hastings' judicial conduct, which revealed that he had attempted to solicit a bribe from an individual involved in a criminal case. Hastings was found guilty of conspiring to solicit a bribe and was convicted in 1989. Following his conviction, the U.S. House of Representatives impeached Hastings, and the Senate removed him from office, making him the sixth federal judge in U.S. history to be impeached. However, in a surprising turn of events, Hastings later won a seat in the U.S. House of Representatives, where he served for over 28 years. During his time in Congress, Hastings became an advocate for civil rights and social justice, serving as a prominent voice in the House. Hastings' case is a unique example of redemption, as he was able to reinvent himself politically after his conviction. His story highlights the complexities of the American legal and political systems, where individuals can sometimes return to positions of power after falling from grace. Hastings' time in Congress, however, did not erase the controversy surrounding his impeachment and removal from the judiciary. His career continues to be a point of debate, especially in the context of judicial accountability and the public's perception of judges who are involved in criminal activities. Deian Krupa. She was a respected judge serving on the U.S. Tax Court, a position that placed her in a powerful role, where she made decisions that impacted the financial lives of countless Americans. Appointed by President George W. Bush in 2003, Krupa was considered an expert in tax law and was trusted with the responsibility of resolving complex tax disputes. But in 2014 she became embroiled in a scandal that shattered her career and sent her to prison. Krupa's downfall began with allegations of tax evasion and fraud, a shocking offense for someone entrusted with the responsibility of interpreting tax law. Over a period of several years, Krupa and her husband David Krupa, who was a former tax preparer, were found to have deliberately avoided paying taxes on their income and assets. The couple used multiple tactics to conceal their true earnings and financial holdings from the IRS. They had a well-orchestrated plan to hide money in multiple sources, including underreporting their taxable income and inflating their deductions. They also funneled income through their businesses and used false documents to deceive tax authorities. Deian Krupa, as a tax expert and judge, was fully aware of the laws she was breaking, making her actions even more egregious. The couple's scheme was exposed when investigators began looking into their financial records. They discovered that for several years, the Krupas had filed false tax returns and had failed to report substantial income. They even went so far as to conceal assets by hiding money in bank accounts under other names, making it appear that they were living far less lavishly than they actually were. The investigation uncovered more disturbing evidence, revealing that Krupa and her husband had engaged in fraudulent activities to evade paying taxes. As a federal judge, Deian Krupa should have known better, but instead, she exploited her knowledge of tax laws to commit serious crimes. In 2015, After a lengthy investigation, Krupa was indicted on charges of tax evasion, fraud, and false tax returns. The case was highly publicized because of her position as a judge. People were shocked that someone in such a position of authority could so blatantly disregard the law. Many believed that Krupa had used her expertise in tax law to manipulate the system for her own benefit. Krupa pled guilty to 1 count of tax evasion, and in 2016, she was sentenced to 34 months in prison. The court also ordered her to pay nearly $1 million in restitution for the taxes she had avoided paying. This was a huge blow, not only to her career but to the public's trust in the judicial system. Judges are meant to uphold the law, not break it, and Krupa's actions left a stain on the reputation of the tax court system. Her case was especially troubling because it involved someone who was supposed to be an authority on the very laws she had violated. Deian Krupa's actions highlighted the dangers of abusing power and authority, especially in the field of law. For years she was in charge of making decisions that impacted people's lives, and yet she used her position to steal from the very system she was supposed to serve. Her conviction sent a message to other judges and public officials that corruption could not be tolerated. It also served as a reminder that anyone, regardless of their position, could fall victim to greed and self-interest. Krupa's case sparked debates about the need for more rigorous checks and balances within the judicial system, especially when it comes to financial misconduct. While Krupa's sentence was significant, the damage she caused to her own reputation, as well as to the integrity of the U.S. tax court, was irreversible. Her actions were a betrayal of the public trust, and they left a lasting mark on the justice system. People who had once respected her for her expertise now saw her as an example of how even those who are meant to uphold the law can sometimes become its most blatant violators. Thomas J. Maloney. Thomas J. Maloney was once a prominent judge in Cook County, Illinois, with a reputation for handling high-profile criminal cases. He was trusted by the public and law enforcement to deliver fair and just decisions. But everything changed in the early 2000s when he became the center of one of the most shocking judicial scandals in U.S. history. Maloney was convicted of bribery and corruption after it was revealed that he had taken money to fix murder trials. Maloney had served as a Cook County Circuit Court judge for years, hearing countless criminal cases including those involving serious charges like murder. But over time he became involved in a scheme where he accepted bribes in exchange for fixing cases, particularly murder cases. He would arrange for defendants to receive lighter sentences or even be acquitted of charges. In return, Maloney would receive large sums of money, often from the defense attorneys representing these defendants. The investigation into Maloney's activities began after a series of accusations came to light. It turned out that Maloney had taken bribes from defense attorneys and in some cases even directly from the defendants' families. He was paid to influence the outcome of trials, ensuring that those who could afford to pay him would have a much better chance of walking away free. In 2002, Maloney was arrested and charged with bribery and fraud. The case was shocking not only because of Maloney's actions but also because of the deep corruption that had been allowed to take place within the judicial system. Maloney was accused of taking bribes in exchange for acquitting or reducing the sentences of defendants charged with serious crimes including murder. The trial was a long and dramatic process. Maloney denied the charges, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. Multiple defense attorneys testified that they had paid Maloney for his help in securing favorable outcomes for their clients. In some cases, Maloney had even instructed defense attorneys on how to present their cases to ensure that he would rule in their favor. In 2003, Maloney was found guilty of racketeering and bribery. He was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison for his crimes. This was a devastating blow to the credibility of the judicial system, especially in Cook County, where Maloney had held considerable influence. The public's trust in the courts was shaken, and people began to question how many other judges might be engaging in similar corrupt activities. Maloney's conviction was a huge scandal, not just because of the crime itself, but also because of the message it sent. For many people, it was hard to believe that a judge, a person who was supposed to uphold the law and ensure justice, could be so easily corrupted. His actions highlighted the vulnerabilities within the judicial system, where money and influence could be used to tip the scales of justice. Maloney's story is a cautionary tale about how power can corrupt even the most trusted individuals. As a judge, he had the power to shape people's lives with his decisions, but instead of using that power to serve justice, he used it for personal gain. His case led to reforms within the judicial system, including calls for stricter oversight of judges and better transparency in the judicial process. In the end, Thomas J. Maloney's fall from grace was a public reminder that no one, not even a judge, is immune to temptation or corruption. His case served as a warning to other judges and public officials that actions taken behind closed doors could have far-reaching consequences. It was a dark chapter for the Cook County judicial system and the state of Illinois, but it was also a wake-up call about the need for accountability and integrity within the judiciary.